Good afternoon, and for some of you on different time zones, good morning and good evening. My siblings, my sisters and brothers, and my fellow conversationalists, it is such a pleasure to be in community with you today. And I thank you so much, Hannah and Iron and Nadia, for the support, and everyone who has shown their commitment to ending male entitlement to female bodies and male sexual violence by being in this room when it's a beautiful day and you could be out on glaciers. So, we can pretend to care, but we can't pretend to show up. So I could talk with you about women, peace and security, demilitarizing conflict zones. We could do that kind of a talk. But I think you're pretty much experts in those areas. So not to duplicate effort, I thought I would share a personal story about why this is the hill on which I am willing to die, and why male sexual violence is the up with which I will not put. And then together we can talk about those moments, the depressions, the catastrophes, and the breakthroughs of resilience and determination that keep us going in spite of and no matter what. So it is pretty much a miracle that a kid like me ends up on a stage like this in a room full of women like you. Going back a couple of generations, my family, there was a lot of love, and it was a system that had a lot of pain, a family system where there was just a lot of pain. We were affected by the family disease of alcoholism. My great-grandmommy was a street house flop alcoholic who died on the streets. And when before she died, she murdered my great-grandfather and then burned down the family business and left the state with the money. So that is the situation into which my Nana, my beloved grandmommy, was born. And this was in Appalachia, in the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky, where there weren't social services and child protection and interventions based on evidence-based, trauma-informed mental health care. So she did the best she could with what she knew and the hand she had been dealt. She had teenage pregnancies, my mom came along, and then my mom was the oldest of 4 children, and my Uncle Brian started to die of a childhood cancer. My papa drank, my Uncle Mark went to his room. Mom had an unplanned teenage pregnancy in 1963 when that just wasn't okay. And the doctor gave my Nana pills and told her to go lay down, which was a very gendered response to a woman's natural grief. So then my folks got married. I came along. And the first time I remember that a man molested me, I was 7 years old. And I do talk about a lot of violence in my story, so please take good care of yourself. I was so little that I felt a loose tooth wiggle in my mouth. And I immediately went to 2 adults and I said, "This is what just happened to me." And you know what they said? And today, thank God, it's different. "He's a nice old man. That's not what he meant." But I didn't quite lose my voice. It was muted, but I knew in my body, which is where we have the deepest knowing on the cellular level, that what we would call today bodily autonomy had been violated. And I sat by my Uncle Mark. He was listening to old-fashioned stereo headphones, and I practiced saying out loud what had happened to me. But I couldn't quite say it because of the way those earlier adults had shut me down. So my life goes on, and somehow or another, my family wasn't really paying attention, and it's no fault of their own. It was just the way it was at the time. I was sent to Japan to model for a summer when I was 14 years old as an unescorted minor. On the first day, when I went into the modeling office, the adult said, "Take off all your clothes and walk around the room." That was day 1. You can imagine what the rest of the summer was like. A couple of rapes by a man, molested by the head of the agency. It's not a mistake that I'm here today and that I am committed to eradicating male entitlement to female bodies. And children are not for sex. So I did manage to go to college. My godmother, and I'm going to talk a little bit about mentorship and sponsorship and female alliances. My godmother is the one who made sure I went to university. And that's where I caught fire. Because of women like you, because of Professor Janine Blackwell, because of Professor Christine Havis, women's studies courses. And I was given a second wave feminist vocabulary to describe my experience and what I witnessed. And I met really the first Black person I knew I had known some black kids growing up, but we were in a very segregated place in eastern Kentucky. And I joined a sorority. I wanted that female fellowship, and I joined a sorority, the same one in which my godmother had been. And I fell in love with Barbara, our cook. And I was sitting at the kitchen table one morning reading the newspaper, and when I opened it up, it said marital rape, still legal in Kentucky. My jaw dropped. I got dizzy. I had physical sensations. And Barbara said, "Oh, yes, honey. Yes, baby. My husband can rape me." Because the political and the legislative and the policy is personal. And Barbara went on to teach me about liberation theology. She taught me about intersectionality, the intersection of race, class, gender, identity, ableism, and how all of these things are a sordid mix. And the solution is personal healing and female alliances. So I was in class one day with Janine Blackwell, and she was talking about the Netherlands and how some non-Jewish people hid Jews in their homes to save them from Nazi persecution, even to the risk of their own lives. And when she told this story, she started to cry. And I thought, click. The click. You know, there's in Ms. Magazine, our American feminist magazine, in the early days, there was a story called The Click. That moment of no return, that moment when I have the recognition, that moment when I will not retreat from my feminism. And I said, that's how I want to be. I want to have a head full of the scholarship and a belly full of fire and a heart that hurts. Because that's what will drive me to be indefatigable in the work. And her vulnerability, combined with her scholarship, was so attractive to me. And they taught me how to write, which I think is such an important personal practice for all of us who are working in these spaces. Janine and Chris did a co-curriculum together about depictions of women in 17th and 18th century art. I didn't know at the time. I was learning about the male gaze. We didn't call it that then. And I had to journal for part of my work, and I was figuring things out, and the connections were like the synapses firing in my brain. And one day, Christine Havis said to me, "Ashley, you have such gifts. They deserve more discipline." What a gift. And I have so much respect and admiration for you in this room because you have the rigor, you have the discipline, and you also have the heart. And that's what finishing the revolution is going to take. So race came into my feminism when this old fart on the board of trustees at the University of Kentucky made a terribly racist statement when the university was considering divesting from apartheid. I won't repeat what he said. It's very offensive. It's very hurtful. But fortunately, a reporter from the student newspaper attended that meeting and reported on the comment. And I knew and loved Barbara. I witnessed her life. I drove her home. I saw where she lived. And she had already taught me that she would take a paycheck from the university, but she wouldn't send her children to school there. And because of Barbara, I said, this is my fight too. It's going to make me cry. When we really see each other, we are recruited to each other's welfare. We are recruited to each other's welfare. And I walked out of my all-white sorority and I found the traditionally black organizations on campus and I said, put me to work. And they said, oh, a whole sorority is with us. And I said, I speak for myself. I can't speak on behalf of anyone else. But we went to work together, and I helped organize a campus-wide march out of classes to protest the ongoing membership on the board of trustees, this old guy who had been so racist. The governor would not remove him. He was the only person who had the power to do that. And so I raised some hell, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And when I went, and by the way, I was very alone in this work, and that's also something that we can ameliorate when we're in these spaces together, is sometimes the loneliness of this walk, right? Because the first thing I did when I, at the appointed hour, and my professor was like, oh, there she goes, stood up, walked out of class, went to my best friend Mary Tripp's class, looked in the window, eyes down, didn't budge, would not walk out with me. And we're still best friends today. It's a story we get to tell together. because it's tough to stick your head above the parapet. But it's so necessary. The lives of girls and women around the world depend on our courage. So my mom didn't know what to make of all of this. I recently did a drawing of myself at that age. I'm standing on the kitchen table. My hair is wild. There's books everywhere. The kitchen chairs are knocked over because of the power of my voice. You know, that discovery is such an alchemical moment. So I thought I was going to join the Peace Corps. I went to a different jungle, Hollywood. I thought if I go to sub-Saharan Africa, I might not ever come home. And this Hollywood thing seemed like a younger woman's game. So off I go to Hollywood. And a family friend said, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to get an agent? Are you going to take out? And I said, I'm going to go to Planned Parenthood. I'm going to escort women across the protests line. And he said, are you going to save the world or to act? What binary thinking? What binary thinking? And Secretary of State Madeleine Albright later taught me, I can do it all, perhaps not at the same time, but I can do it all. So becoming a working actor was normal very quickly. My first film, Ruby in Paradise, was awarded the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival. And then I started to work. And I got tired of working because I had the ick inside of me from that childhood, from the sexual trauma, from the loss and the bereavement, the unresolved grief of growing up with my mother and sister famous. I lived alone for 2 years as a child without an adult, a caregiver, a neighbor, walking a dog on a set schedule. I lived alone for 2 years. I was so lost. I was the lost child, as we say. And I actually didn't get prostituted or trafficked because I was so under the radar. You know, but a girl like that today, it takes less than 24 hours for a pimp to make contact with her in the United States. So I did stay safe in that way, but as I was saying, I was working and I just was restless and irritable and discontent. And then one day I got this letter. It was from Kate Roberts, who worked at Population Services International, the global public health NGO. And she said, would you come serve as our global ambassador? And I said, oh, it's probably good parking with that. I don't know. It sounds pretty good. I don't really know what you mean, but hey. And on that very same day, Bono reached out to me and my spiritual brother, Bobby Shriver, and they asked me if I would be willing to do something about the HIV/AIDS emergency in sub-Saharan Africa, its disproportionate effect on girls and women, and orphans and vulnerable children. And I said, this is not a coincidence. This is God remaining invisible in my life, but showing up through these people. I wrote Kate back a full-paged, single-spaced feminist manifesto to make sure that PSI was a gender equality organization. I'm sure they kind of chuckled, like, check out this one. But that's how I got started. That was in 2002, and my first trip was in 2004 to Cambodia, where I found myself in the child brothels outside Phnom Penh. And what I learned is that people just need and want to be loved and to have their reality witnessed. And people held me, and I held them, and thus started a journey 23 countries later of the most sacred honor of my life, which is being trusted by girls and women. Being trusted by girls and women. And I learned how to do some hard things, like walk out of an orphanage without a kid on each hip, one on my back and one to my chest. And I learned that I have to take care of myself in this process, which is part of my core message for you today. We cannot transmit that which we do not have. And self-care isn't selfish. It is self-esteem. And there's a certain audacity or even arrogance, if we will, to thinking that I can go out and be of service to someone if my own house is not in order. Because the trauma that we do not transform in ourselves is the trauma we will transfer to others. So in 2006, I went to inpatient treatment for unresolved childhood grief and sexual trauma. And I got to act out all of the anger, all of the rage, all of that toxic patriarchal shame that had been dumped on my small body. And it's hard to talk about this work when you're not in the room because it sounds kind of weird, and what does that really look and sound like? But there's a big cube, a big sponge cube, and I beat the shit out of that thing. It's kind of the way that work goes. Just moving it out of my body so that I could become a more whole, healing vessel that has the capacity to hold stories from Kutupalong refugee camp in Bangladesh, from a mile from the front in eastern Ukraine, where men who are fighting come home and because of their trauma and violence beat their wives. To hold those stories with integrity and then to transform them into righteous action at the policy and the government level. I've had the chance to address the UN General Assembly on the global human trafficking epidemic. More slaves today than there were at the height of the North American slave trade. But the best place I've ever been is in a forest foraging with a poor woman who's looking for mushrooms when they're in season or digging for caterpillars. The privilege of being with each other. And then we come together here and give each other support because we can be like bonobos. Anybody know a bonobo? Yes. So bonobos are a primate. There are 4 primates, right? So they're a primate. They don't have tails. They're not a monkey. They live only in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the deepest heart of the Central African rainforest. They're highly endangered. They are also matriarchal, egalitarian. A female is always the highest ranking individual. And bonobos are entirely free from male sexual coercion and male dominance. Female bonobos have full reproductive autonomy and choice in their copulations. So I spend a lot of time in the rainforest with the bonobos. My partner just published a big paper today in Science on them. I'm very proud of him. And when I sit there on the rainforest floor against a magnificent tree looking up, it might look like this. And we've named all the bonobos. They're known to us. And so it might be Bleu. And Bleu is hanging out in her tree doing her thing. And a male might decide he wants to copulate. So he comes over and he solicits. And she's like, oh, no, I don't think so. And he just ambles away. No retaliation, no second request, no further harassment. And you know how bonobos do this? Female alliances. All female bonobos help all other female alliances, whether or not they're related, whether or not they know each other, or whether or not they like each other, which can be measured by how much time they spend grooming and sharing valuable resources. This is called female gregariousness, and they've done it without a constitution. And so being with the bonobos gives me tremendous hope, because unlike chimpanzees, 100% of whom the females are severely beaten and sexually coerced by males, no female bonobo has ever experienced male violence in her life. And there are no recorded examples of homicide and infanticide. These are our closest living relatives, and they prove the natural fallacy is wrong, that because things are a certain way, they've always been that way and they will always be that way. That is false. And bonobos show us that male sexual coercion is not evolutionarily inevitable. And per the earlier comments, need I mention that they're the least researched and least funded of the great apes. But my partner and I are doing something about that. So I want to talk about some of these moments of going real far down and then finding that personal resilience and then connecting it to a wider community. Because I believe that this work is an inside job. No one can do it for me. You can love me, you can praise me, you can say I'm doing well, but it bounces off, right? I mean, I might hear it at a certain level, but for it to be soul deep, it has to be an inside job. We have to find that courage in the middle of the night, in the dark night of the soul, and learn how to hold our own hand. And just like it says in the Bhagavad Gita, I don't know what's going to happen if I take this action, but that part is none of my business. My business is to do the next good, right, honest thing and let go of the results. If the world were to end tomorrow, I would still plant my apple tree today. So 2016 was devastating, and in 2017 there was an inauguration of a president He did not win the popular vote. A woman did by 2 million votes. We just have this weird thing called the Electoral College. That's right. And so we had a women's march to show our resistance, and I showed up and I was able to perform a spoken poem called Nasty Woman, written by Nina Donovan, a young woman of color. That poem meant so much to millions of us. I've had women crying, coming up to me in airports and saying, you know, you saved my life. That poem saved my life and gave me the courage to keep going on when this misogynist was elected. And it was revealed that so many people supported him. And this is really, it was uncovered that these are really the attitudes in our country. But I also got fired from a big job for doing that speech. I was the spokesperson for a fitness company. It was good income generation for me because my film career had been harmed by Harvey Weinstein, which we're also going to talk about. So I depended on this paycheck. But the company invoked their so-called morality clause and terminated me. So Donald Trump gets to say it and be elected. I quote him as a woman, and I lose a job. This is the reality with which some of us still live. So what did I do about that? I didn't back off. I didn't go away. I kept doing Nasty Woman when I would show up in spaces like this and people wanted to hear a quote from it. And Female Alliances, the next woman they hired, I said to her, hey, I don't think that they probably told you about why the job is available. So I gave her that information, and it's up to her to do with it as she will. And not only did they fire me, the man who was the spokesperson was a known sexual harasser and predator who has pictures of his genitals on the internet. They hire him, they fire me. We still have a fight on our hands. But let's talk a little bit about Harvey and what those moments are like, right? So 1996, I'm filming Kiss the Girls. It's a night shoot. I go to the hotel where both he and I happen to stay, the Peninsula, to have this breakfast meeting with him. And I go to the front desk because I know them and they know me. And I say, is Mr. Weinstein in the restaurant or is he on the patio? And they said, oh, he's in his room. You know what I thought? I'm so naive. I thought, room service takes so long. I'm so tie-tie. I'm going to have to order cereal to make the meeting go faster. So I go upstairs and Harvey does what Harvey did, the bathrobe, the sexual harassment, the threats, the watch me take a bath, all of this stuff. And I managed to get out of the room. My trauma responses kicked in. And I realized he would not speak my language. He could not hear no. So I stooped to his level and spoke his language. And we shall not shame women for becoming what is called having tonic immobility and doing and saying the things that are necessary to save their lives. What we do in our trauma is appropriate and it is life-saving. And we should not criticize a woman's behavior and say, oh, she was asking for it or she had a filthy mouth or something like that. So time goes by and I do an interview with Variety magazine, a Hollywood trade magazine, and they happen to say, have you ever been sexually harassed? And I was like, and how? And I told the whole story. And this is over my lunchtime while promoting a movie, so I didn't have a chance to call my lawyer first and say, hey, am I going to get sued for defamation or slander? I just told the story and I didn't mention Harvey's name. Everyone knew who we were talking about. And then 2 years later, Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor's Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalism comes out in the New York Times. I had been working with Jodi and I had decided that I would be the named source for their investigation. How did I do that? How have you done it? How have you spoken up about that microaggression? How have you in a boardroom said, excuse me, I wasn't finished speaking yet? I did talk to my lawyer, I did all the right things, and you know what she said? Because it comes down to our womanhood. She said, Ashley, if you can't do this, who can? And I felt that responsibility. I felt that responsibility that is such an honor. And so I also thought, because I have a spiritual practice, I probably need to pray. So I went out for a run, laced up my shoes, and I thought, how am I going to make this decision? I always want to do the harder thing anyway. And I realized that I've already made the most important decision I'll ever make in my life, which is that I stand and I die with you. And it was super easy to call Jodi back and say, I'll be your named source in your investigative report. And the last thing I want to close with before we invite the wonderful Adrianne to the stage is when we do this work on ourselves, we get to this place of non-punitivity. We get to a place where we can have conflict without being controversial, where I can stand for something without standing against my fellows. There's a part of me that loves Harvey Weinstein. We have profoundly affected each other's lives. He may be in prison and I may be here with you, but we're in a relationship of sorts. And I see him not as bad and wrong, needing to get good and right, but as sick and suffering who was set up by a system and enabled by it that does not expunge his record or make him void of personal responsibility. But it does broaden the understanding so that we can bring men and boys in as our collaborators and our allies. Because as much as we need each other, we need boys and men too. They have to be incentivized to change while they're being held accountable. So that's a little bit of my story. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you like this. And now let's welcome Adrianne to the stage. Thank you. Hi.
Wow.
Where would you like to be? Can I have the water?
Yes, applaud, applaud,
Thank
applaud.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, a talk like this, you have to call a person by their whole name. Ashley Judd, she just gave so much passion and so much energy into everything that you said, and you just made me think about Oprah Winfrey's movie, and there's a line in there with Miss Seeley. How many of you saw The Color Purple, right? And she says, Miss Seeley says, all my life I had to fight, right? A girl child just ain't safe in a world full of men, right? And this has been like the story of so many women around the world. And what I hear from you is a fighter, right? Someone who, beyond a shadow of a doubt, will never give up, continue to inspire everyone in the room. And we need to feel some of that inspiration right now. So on the count of 3, I want everyone under the sound of my voice to say yes. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
It felt good, but I want to hear it one more time. On the count of 3, everyone under the sound of my voice say yes. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
So let me tell you what you agreed to. You have agreed to being a vehicle of power, a vehicle of inspiration, a vehicle that gives license to put into place plans of succession, places where people don't have to suffer again through the things that you have suffered through, the same things that so many women in the room have suffered through, that you will fight so that these generational curses that we hear about, that are really not curses, they're just systemic problems that we can actually fix if we properly nurture and give life, give license to young women to say yes to opportunity, yes to access to everything that will make them who they're supposed to be, that God-given authentic self. So I'm excited to sit down right now and have a conversation with you, because I've heard some common themes throughout the day that I think you have encompassed in your 20-minute just inspirational everything. You've given us life right now. So I'm going to open up my notebook, right? So one of the common themes I heard today, and it's kind of like the grounding moment now, is we have to keep the fire going. How do you keep that fire going? How do you keep the fight going in your life so that if you know the world is ending tomorrow, you're going to plant your apple tree anyway?
I appreciate that question a lot, and I have 2 answers. One is that guy who keeps cutting in front of me in line. I mean, that guy, he shows up everywhere. He shows up in Turkey. He shows up in Franklin, Tennessee, just getting cut in front of in line. I don't tolerate that. And one little story, so that's a personal thing that kind of keeps me going, because then I tell my chosen family, like Heather, who's here with me today, and we share it with their children so that we can create this awareness and these changes. We live in a small town in Tennessee, and I was doing my trade with a clerk, and this guy came in and just totally cut in front of me. And I said, "Excuse me, I'm doing my business right now." And he said, well, I'm only going to be a minute. And I said, I'm only going to be a minute. And I said, there's a line. And he said, it's long. I said, I know, go stand in it. So just moments like that keep me going, but also thinking about being with, for example, a grandmother in an IDP camp in South Sudan.
Yes.
I was traveling with UNFPA, with whom I work, and she and I were sitting together, and she was blind, and I had a UNFPA dignity kit for her, but it didn't have sandals, and she wanted sandals. And she managed her disappointment with such grace because she's so used to living with disappointment, and I started to cry. And she could tell that I was crying, and she began to embrace me and hug me, and with her cheeks, wipe my tears off of my cheeks. And she said, you're my granddaughter. You're my granddaughter. That keeps me going.
I love it. One thing we talked about when I opened up this session about getting everyone to say yes. Many people have said yes to you. I know someone said yes to me, and it inspired me to create programs that provide access and opportunities to young people to go to large festivals around the world. What does it saying yes look like to you, and how do you encourage other people to say yes?
Oh, I mean, there's a wonderful line in Sanskrit about the dawn and saying yes to the dawn of a new day. I first of all make sure that I have something to give, and that I'm giving from my abundance and not from scarcity or depletion. So before I say yes, I do an internal evaluation, and I also check my motive. Is this for good reason? Is this about power, property, and prestige? Am I trying to impress somebody, or is this the fire in my belly? And then, as with all of you, we get to the stage in life with all these relationships, and there are so many automatic yeses. Like I automatically say yes to Hillary Clinton or Milan, and I have had to modify that somewhat because I couldn't write my second book if I just kept saying yes. And then saying yes to the fight is, that girl in a slum in India who was on the verge of being trafficked because she was, about to start her period, and that's when the men like to sell them off. And she just melted into my arms and asked me to brush and braid her hair. And I thought, I don't know if I can protect her from what is pretty inevitable in this particular slum, but she can know that she's loved and that I came here just for her. And so things like that help me also say yes.
And when you're saying yes, and you mentioned to it, I'm just thinking back about the everything that you said to us that, again, was so inspirational. Self-care.
Yes.
Taking care of who you are as an individual first. I heard in one of the earlier talks, one of the women said, it's exhausting work. I get tired, but I make the decision to keep going anyway. What is it that keeps you going? And I think about the Serenity Prayer, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Serenity Prayer. But then I like the notion of disrupting the Serenity Prayer. And I'm just going to read it because I should know it by heart. Not that, but how we should disrupt the Serenity Prayer by saying, I am no longer accepting things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept.
I love that.
How are we encouraging each other? What are we doing to make them change and not be tired? What's that regenerating, energy regenerator for you?
Yes, so my experience is at times I will be tired. But I wake up every morning and I read. I'm in a 12-step program. I'm in recovery. And so I read some spiritual texts from my recovery. I follow this radical Franciscan friar named Richard Rohr, and I read his readings, and they're very much about unitive consciousness and letting go and understanding that I have bias I'm not even aware that I have. And so I get a lot of support from that. I will go to spiritual retreats. I've been on silent retreats at the Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky, which is where Thomas Merton was a hermit. And I have a sponsor, and I have a wisdom teacher with whom I've walked since 2002, and he and I just got to do a podcast together called The Wise Unknown, it's very pure, distilled Ted Klontz wisdom. I recommend listening to it. So those things are non-negotiable. And I like, my partner and I have a very tender physical relationship. I think touch is an important part of being regenerated and just holding and holding hands. We hold hands in our sleep. I mean, just being connected to another body is so good for that helpfulness with exhaustion. And then, even during the day, it's something like this, I'll take a break. I had a migraine. I've seen the Icelandic healthcare system. It's wonderful. I was in the emergency room with my migraine night before last. And so I thought I need to go take a quick snooze before this. And not asking anyone for permission.
Yes.
That's the part I said is an inside job. I have to validate myself and know that I have the right to pace myself. Because again, I cannot transmit what I do not have. And sitting in inspirational circles with other women, and hearing how y'all get on is very valuable.
So I heard you just say something which, is very powerful. You have been traumatized by men. But you just named maybe 3 or 4 men who you seek support from.
Yes.
So we talk about generational curses, and which are really trauma. You've broken that trauma.
Yes.
And we want everyone else in the room to be able to have that strength to break the trauma of being resilient. Is that the word? Would you say you're a resilient activist of some sort that allows you to forgive the very nature of the being and thing that harmed you and possibly caused you trauma? And also, let's celebrate that you're willing to get help.
Yes.
Right? And so many times people are stigmatized and afraid to get help, but you've done that.
Yes.
What is that motivational thing?
Well, I really love picking up on the theme of having men in my life, because exiling boys and men is not the answer. They're here too, and we have to bring them along. And I'm so grateful that I was taught that forgiveness is no favor. I do it for myself. And so I will ask myself a question. How free do I want to be? How free do I want to be? Or do I want to drink the poison and hope someone else will get sick?
Yes, wow.
And, I come from a politically mixed family. So my pop is a big Trump guy. My Uncle Roy was a Trump guy. And Uncle Roy and I broke up after the election. I mean, and it was a messy breakup, It was like something from the 10th grade. You know how we came back together? A cup of coffee, a piece of pie, and a kitchen table.
Wow. You found your common denominator again.
I loved him. I missed him.
Yes.
He loved me. He missed me. And I decided that I wasn't going to waste my life punishing people because they don't behave the way I think they should behave. And he's a great ally of mine. And my mom was the same. She has a very mixed political and social record for reasons of wanting validation from the patriarchy and all of that stuff. A man molested her for the first time when she was 4. But she was supporting her candidate, and I was supporting my presidential candidate. She thought mine was wackadoodle. I knew hers was wackadoodle. Elizabeth Warren. So I go to speak on behalf of Senator Warren. I'm a surrogate. And my mother attends. And she has on all her hair and she didn't try to hide. And afterwards she came to me and she said, "Oh, honey, you were perfect. They're so lucky to have you." I found it possible to have those kinds of relationships, even with people with whom I differ and actively think are doing harm.
Wow. Well, I think our time is up. But before we go, I need everyone to say yes to Nate. I was about to say, Ashley, again, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Yes to love. Yes to everything you do. And thank you guys so much for the time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been really beautiful.
That was awesome.
Thank you.